Okay, so here's the deal. I've been given an assignment by a client, a gig, but the client has some specifics, and this is not unusual. This is a very typical situation when you write music for documentaries, commercials, games, audiobooks, etc. The client will often have specifics that you have to meet, but apart from that, you can do pretty much whatever you want, unless the client has made his visuals to a temp track. That will be something different. That is often the most difficult spec to meet for a composer. If the client has a temp track he's attached to emotionally. In this case, this is not how it's going to be, so I'm free to make whatever I want as long as I meet those specs. So a little bit of dynamics changes throughout, and it has to be loopable and around 1 minute. So that's the criteria. And this is something I like very much. It gives me a lot of freedom, but confined to some boundaries, which can often be a creative boost in itself, actually. And as I almost always do, I flesh out the composition first. This is purely instrumental, by the way, so there's no vocals or anything here, so it'll all be done with synths. And with 1 minute, I don't have all that much to go with, so I have to keep it simple in terms of chord changes, chord progressions. Ideally, I would like to stick to just 3 or 4 chords tops, and make some changes with the sounds instead. Never forget, you're supporting a visual story here, so the music has to support what's going on the screen or and the narrative going in terms of audio. If there's someone's reading a story or whatever you're making music for. Let's go with a mellow sound here and see if we can flesh out some ideas. And what I thought about straight away was going with some kind of minor stuff. This is what I usually gravitate towards, minor chords. So let's go down an octave here. So that's an F minor chord. So let's play with that a little bit. This is what I came up with. A very simple idea, F minor, A flat and C minor. Nothing to it, very few notes, just enough to get some emotions going. A love theme is usually between 2 persons, or it could be a person and an animal, if you have a pet, for instance, that you love very much. I won't go into what kind of love relationship this is, but it is between 2 beings, living beings. So let's keep it at that, and that will also make it easier to translate into another sound during the course of this minute. So each part of the 1 minute segment can be different because there's 2 different beings involved in the love theme. Also something to keep in mind. So that is very, very loopable, repeatable. So I'll just use that chord progression, F minor, A flat, and C minor throughout, but again with different instrumentation. So let's see how this can be recorded. So a little bit of variation towards the end of the first segment. This love theme here now is divided up into 3 different parts. So coming towards the end of this one, I now decided to go for a electric piano sound. So let me start up that. This is a electric piano from the Yamaha TX802. I would not have committed to a hardware synth right away. I always make a sketch, all in MIDI with VSTs for the client to listen to and approve of before changing out any sounds with hardware synths. There's usually lots of revisions before we come to that. The client might require a slower tempo, a higher tempo, maybe the key is too high or too low for the client's liking. So I always wait until those things are approved before changing out any VST synths with hardware synths. Most of the time, I stick with the VSTs in 90% of everything I lay down, because as revisions come and go before the client approves, both the client and myself often get attached to the synths or sounds used from the get-go. In the case of a classic DX electric piano, that transition isn't very hard and it can easily be done. So in this case, I did change out the Dexit for the real thing. This is only with a bit of chorus on it, no reverbs or anything. That will come later. So let's see what I recorded for that part. Let's go in at the beginning of the first part here and go into the DX piano. So as you heard, I have a pad sound going behind the electric piano here, a very classic, let's turn that off again. The classic soundtrack pad patch from the JX8P, here done by the PG8X, and this is excellent in itself, so no need to change that out. I'll go for that VST PG8X. And I also give a little bit back of the mellow sound in the beginning, also from the PG8X, to augment the electric piano a little bit. So there's three sounds during this second part of the cue. So the electric piano, the soundtrack pad, and that first synth, the mellow pad sound with a harder attack. And if the first part was the one being in the love theme and the second part was the second being in the love part, sort of talking to each other through two different monologues, if you like, then the third segment of this cue will be where they come together in a way and both talk at the same time or kiss or whatever. You can imagine yourself what's going to happen. But during this third and final segment, I wanted to bring in bass and drums. All of this is supposed to be in a 80s fashion, so of course I have to do it like in the 80s in terms of sound and arrangement and everything, reverbs, stuff like that, gated reverbs, maybe. So let's check out what's happening in the third segment here. So let's go in halfway here through the electric piano and have a listen. And we're back to the beginning again, a perfect loop point. There's some tricks I've done to make that loop point actually work. I'll come back to that shortly. So there's a kick drum, a snare drum, a rim shot, couple of hi-hats and some shakers. And as you can hear on the reverb, they are not very long. They sort of gated, very common, of course, for the 80s. That's the kick, snare, hi-hat. Also gated, the shakers. Longer reverb and some delays on them as well. Give everything a sort of living, breathing feel. And the rim shot. Also gated. The one thing that's a standout here is the snare. Let's have a listen to that. So that's very dry and very sort of crackly in sound. And I put it quite high in the mix because I wanted the punch of that snare drum to really come through. And it's only playing on every second beat, alternating with the rim shot. So you'll have a dynamic there as well. Two different types of punctuations. If I take the snare down in volume, I don't think the arrangement has as much impact. Let's check it out. Now it's more in line with the rim shot in terms of volume and loudness, but everything is just being sucked out, I think, in terms of weight. I think that having this snare quite high in loudness and volume brings that together. So that's that. I'll close that down and let's have a listen to the bass. So this is from the OBXD plugin, which I love and I use a lot. And that's resonant filter sweep. Gives everything a sort of really nice depth together with the drums. And I also add in a little bit of strings here. That's coming from the Tal sampler, I think it's a Jupiter 8 string sound I've sampled into one of my libraries, which I use a lot. So that's everything that's going on here. We have the intro part. We have the electric piano part. And we have the third segment where everything comes together. And what's important at the end of the segment where it's supposed to loop is that you bring down reverbs and delays and legato type of sounds, in this case the bass most of all, so it sort of ends shortly before the loop point, because if you play everything towards and all up to the loop point, especially with reverb tails and stuff like that, it will be a very audible, not necessarily click, but you will hear definitely that it's a loop point when everything starts over again. So I bring everything down just 10 or 20 milliseconds before the loop point, the end here, so that the loop point will be as non-obtrusive as possible. The only thing I've added to all of this is something in the beginning here. And let's see if I can find that sound on my keys here. Let's check it out. Here. This is basically a sine wave with a short attack. And I use that with lots of reverb, lots of delays to augment that first mellow synth pad in the beginning, synth patch. Let's check it out. this is all played by hand to give the whole thing a little bit of a human feel. So not everything has to be quantized. It'll often be too sterile if it's all quantized. So most of these parts are played by hand, while the drums are put up against a grid, and the bass is also played live. So there is quite a lot playing by hand here. Again, everything from the beginning. I also bring all the notes sort of downwards towards the end here, so they'll also be more loopable and in sync with the beginning again, which starts in a not too high register. So if everything would go out on top, the loop point and when everything starts again would be maybe too jarring maybe. So this is also a kind of thing I like to do. To bring everything together in a more, subtle way. So this is basically how I would make a track of this kind. I think it's a little bit over 1 minute. So if the client would argue that it has to be pretty much on the minute mark, in this case, in this arrangement, I would just probably just change out the BPMs and just up the tempo a little bit. But usually, if you go 10 or 20 seconds above, it's usually not a problem, but it can be, and then you have to be prepared to make changes. I would maybe have to change out the middle part and shorten that if it was really important that would stay within 1 minute. So there's always things you can do. And in this case, with only 3 chords going throughout, shortening down that middle section would not be a big problem. It would be pretty easy to do actually. So this is basically how I would go about making something like this. And this is a true, real example from one of my past gigs. And as always, I'm Kraft. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.